it's Andy with Epic Automotive. Today we're going to show you how to put a front wheel bearing on a 2003 Honda Civic. So let's get started. So once you have the wheel off, the first thing you need to do is remove the brakes. The caliper is held on by two 17mm bolts on the back of the bracket. And then we can remove the rotor by removing these two Phillips screws and then pull the rotor off of it. We've got the brakes off. The next thing we want to do is remove the axle nut on the end of the drive shaft. We see this one has a little notch on the end. What you want to do is take a little chisel, a skinny chisel, and tap on that to round that up a little bit so that when you remove the nut it doesn't damage the end of the axle. So take a tool and do that, and then we can go from there. So we need to pull the whole knuckle off of the vehicle. So the next thing we need to do is remove the ball joint from the lower control arm. So we need to pull this pin out, remove this nut, and then we'll show you how to separate the ball joint from the control arm. So we've got the nut removed. Now we want to separate the control arm from the bottom of the knuckle, the ball joint. If you use a pickle fork, you'll usually wind up damaging the rubber boot. So I tend not to do that. What you can do is just tap on the bottom of the control arm. Usually that's enough force to just pop the ball joint out of there. So let's try that. Alright, so we see just a few taps was enough to release that ball joint. So now we can work on the upper part of the knuckle. So before we remove the top part of our knuckle, we want to remove our ABS sensor. It's just a 10 mil. So take that 10 mil out, pull the sensor out, and then we can work on the top part of the knuckle. So now we see where the strut and the knuckle are bolted together with two long bolts. The bolt end is 19 millimeters, the nut is 22 millimeters. So we remove those two, then we can pull the whole knuckle off of there. With our bolts loose, we can just pull those out and then pull the knuckle off of the assembly here. So now we've got our knuckle out and in the vise. Before we can press the bearing out, we need to remove the inner portion, the hub, which has the studs on it, the wheel studs. So we need to press that out before we can press the bearing out. I found the easiest way to do this, rather than using a shop press to remove the hub, is just take a tool that fits around here and just use a hammer and tap it out. So tap that hub out, and then we can press the bearing out. So now with the hub removed, we see a retaining ring that needs to come out before we can press the bearing out. So take your ring pliers and pull that out. So now we're ready to press the bearing out. Again, just like with the hub, found that it's easier to press it out on with a vise on the bench. Just hammer it out just like you did the hub in the same direction the hub came out. But then of course when installing the new bearing, we'll need to use the press and press that in, because you don't want to damage anything pressing it in. But let's go ahead and hammer this one out. And now the old bearing is out. So now we need to press the new bearing into place. To do that properly, we need to set up the press properly. So what you want to do is actually take the old bearing and put it on the back side of the knuckle. See how it's the back side of the knuckle is bigger around than the old bearing, so you can actually use that as a press tool. Put it on the back. We want to make sure you're applying even pressure directly on top of the bearing when you press it in. So this needs to be stacked up enough so that when you set it on there, no part of the knuckle is touching the press. If any part of the knuckle is touching the press, if it's bent this way or that way, when you apply pressure, it can really bend or even crack the knuckle. You may not even realize it, then your alignment will be way off. So you want to make sure you're applying even pressure directly on top of the bearing, so you want all that support to be directly underneath. So use the old bearing to do that. So now let's press our new bearing into place. So now with the bearing fully seated in position, we can install our retaining ring back in and then press the hub back on. So you'll see on our hub, this is what happens when you pull hubs off of bearings. The outer race will stick on the hub. So what we'll need to do is take a cutoff wheel, cut a slot in it diagonally, and then take a chisel and tap it off of there so that then we can then press the hub onto the new bearing. And our old race is off, so now we can press the hub into the bearing. So we can press the hub on in the same way that we pressed the new bearing in place, but this time rather than using the old wheel bearing to support the back, you actually need to use a press tool to support the back of this race, because when you press the new hub in, it'll want to force this inner race off of the bearing. So we need to support the back of the race with a press tool so that the weight is supported there when it's pressed in and that inner race doesn't come out. So let's go ahead and do that. With our hub pressed into our new bearing, we're ready to take the whole knuckle assembly back on the vehicle, install everything back, tighten everything to spec, and we should be all set. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.